People who believe they have all the budget basics down and all their financial bases covered can still get in trouble for overspending. Researchers are just now beginning to understand why. WSJ's Charlie Wells joins us now from London to tell us more. Hi, Charlie. Great to see you.
Great to see you again.
So, Charlie, people know they need to make and stick to a budget, make sure their expenses match their incomes. They know all this. So why are so many people still busting their budgets?
Well, one of the main findings of this article is that people have sort of psychological blind spots when it comes to thinking about their finances and their future. So even if they're very smart people, even if they intellectually understand what it means to have, a personal balance sheet, to avoid debt, to maintain savings, they still have these sort of subconscious desires or understandings about finance that, if not checked, can send them down the wrong path.
And we do see that people spend almost as much as they bring in pre-tax income when you look
That's right.
Which means not much is getting put away.
That's right. That's unfortunate.
So, Charlie, let's talk about what we all need to keep in mind. And I think that one of the main things you talk about is that a lot of people don't give their future expenses enough weight. Is that correct?
That's right. So one researcher out of the University of Colorado at Boulder found that people are really good about thinking about how their incomes are going to rise in the future, but they're really bad about thinking about how their expenses are going to rise along with them. And what he found is that as people grow wealthier, their expenses actually grow as well. And so this is how people sort of end up getting richer, but still buying that house they ultimately can't afford, that car that they ultimately can't afford. So his takeaway here is to know when you're making a purchase or a big financial decision, know that you might be ignoring the expenses, that in your mind you might have sort of a tendency to do that, and create a very strict budget and stick to it.
All right, and the next one might seem a little backward, but we shouldn't use credit to pay for an emergency if we have the savings, right? Charlie, we should pull out of savings first.
That's right. So an academic that I spoke with at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business was a little bit concerned about this idea about savings in the United States. So there's this general understanding that Americans don't save enough, and that's true, but her worry was that people actually might be being a little bit too simplistic about this and doing, financially irresponsible things in order to maintain those savings, even if they already had an emergency fund. And so what she sort of noticed is that people were willing to spend, on credit cards at expensive interest rates just to maintain extra savings and feel financially responsible. So the takeaway there is really, if you need to make a purchase, think about where the money is coming from. Feel okay if you've got an emergency fund, taking some out of your savings as long as you're going to replenish it later on.
Very, very good advice. And then, of course, don't get into that mindset of spending to reward yourself.
Right. So a couple of researchers from Stanford and the University of Zurich had found that people sort of think about willpower in two different ways. So there are people who think that willpower is something that's sort of unlimited, something that they can tap again and again, and people who think that willpower is finite. And those people who think that willpower is finite, after exerting themselves, feel like they should reward themselves and tend to reward themselves with overspending. And so one recommendation from an academic I talked to was, if you've had a stressful day, if you've been at work and you feel like you've really exerted that willpower, don't put yourself in a situation where you feel like you're going to be tempted to spend. Go to a yoga class, schedule a workout instead of, going to the mall.
So much better. Now, what does our mood have to do with spending? This is so fascinating to me.
Right, so happiness research is really coming to personal finance. And what an Australian professor I spoke with found was that when people were happier, they saved more, they spent less, they thought about the future in a more realistic way and made better financial decisions. And so one recommendation from this expert was that if you find yourself needing to make a financial decision but you're not in the best mood, try to wait if you can. And if you can't, phone a friend, preferably a happy one.
Now, another place where a lot of people go wrong, you say, Charlie, is when they think about their home equity. That makes them feel wealthier than they perhaps are, correct?
Right. Right. So one economist at the Boston Fed did a study about home values. And so he found that as people's home values increased, they spent it somewhere about, I think, 6 to 18 cents more per dollar of the home value increase. And essentially what he found is this is tied to home equity lines of credit, and that when people's homes are worth more, they borrow more against their homes and they can spend more. And the real important recommendation that he had there was, don't think about your home as a credit card. Think about it as a place where you live.
That's a very easy one to fall into. Charlie Wells in London, thank you so much for all that.